The Four Nations break throughout the NHL, so let's take a little closer look at the New Jersey Devils. We got WFUV Sports' two New Jersey Devils beat reporters with us. I am James Birle, joined by Tucker Austin. First and foremost, Tucker, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's been a pretty tumultuous week and a half. A lot of travel for Fordham women's basketball, doing those broadcasts. We just got back from Philly last night for the LaSalle game. Big win.
Huge.
For the Fordham Rams. Snapped a 4-game L streak. So honestly, I'm pretty happy about that now. If they lost, I think I would have been really tired today. But their win and getting to call a win really just kind of it's energizing me today. And of course, we've got USA Hockey tonight versus Finland.
I mean, you've been keeping busy. Jack Hughes has been keeping busy. So why don't we keep busy together? Let's talk some Devils. The Four Nations break. I mean, we got treated to Canada, Sweden last night. What a treat that was. Hoping that there's some of that magic in the U.S. game tonight, and hopefully Jack Hughes gets on the board. We've got 3 New Jersey Devils playing at the Four Nations. Could have been 4, and would have had 3 of the Four Nations represented. Jack Hughes with the U.S., of course, Erik Haula with Finland, Jesper Bratt with Sweden, and Jacob Markstrom was tipped to be the goaltender for Sweden, but also ultimately missed with injury. So basically, what we're here to do is catch you fine folks up on what you've missed or haven't missed this season thus far with the New Jersey Devils. It's been a tumultuous year, like you said, Tucker. We've both gotten the opportunity to go in and out of the locker room, of the press box for games this season. And let's just jump right into it. The Devils started this season pretty beautifully, I would say. Things have not been as sharp lately as we would have hoped as fans and reporters of this team. But let's catch everybody up to where the New Jersey Devils have been. I think about this season, I think of the word bounce back, return. 2023-24 was not it. They were decimated with injuries, had no goaltending, and were decisively out of the playoffs for most of the season. But you go back 1 year before, not only were they a playoff team, they were over 100 points. You had Jack Hughes on 99 points, defeated the dreaded Rangers in round 1 of the playoffs.
What a 7-game series that was.
Amazing 7-game series. Memories I will cherish forever from that moment in time. And now it starts to feel more like 2 years ago, but through a different flavor, I would say. They've gotten the goaltending this year. Jacob Markstrom comes in the offseason and joins Jake Allen in the goaltending ranks, and they've both been phenomenal.
And it's not just the goaltending, though. It's the defense, too. The defense vastly improved. You pick up Kovacevic, you pick up Brett Pesce, oh my goodness.
And Brendan Dillon
Brendan
adding some
Dillon,
beef
yes,
to that blue line
thank you.
as well.
Oh my, yeah. Just those 3 guys alone, literally, they took the defense from really, really mid last year to an elite level this year. I think we can safely say elite defense. And then you add just one top 5 goaltender in Jacob Markstrom, and we've seen so many really, really great defensive performances. A lot of games where the Devils are only giving up 1 or 2 goals. A lot of shutouts this year too. Jake Allen, isn't he second in the NHL in shutouts right now with 4?
At this moment. And I mean, we've gotten really lucky that not only do we have a number 1 in Markstrom, that the number 2 in Allen can come in and not only just be a great stopgap for the team, but in Markstrom's absence has been among the elite goalies of the NHL.
Year of the Snake Allen.
Year of the Snake Allen. I love that. Let's go all the way back to October. Season starts in the Czech Republic. Back-to-back games against the Buffalo Sabres, against our old pal Lindy Ruff, who was ousted at the end of last season. Sheldon Keefe's first game as the coach of the New Jersey Devils, and it's 2 back-to-back wins to open up the year in Czechia. Granted, the Buffalo Sabres not the greatest team. I'm thinking back to what my impressions were of the Devils at that point, and it's kind of what we were just talking about. They had that structure. Defensively, it looked much better than anything we've seen. We were talking before we started recording. Is this the best defensive Devils team that we've seen in our lifetimes? Because we did not have the privilege of living through the late 90s, early 2000s, or at least not long enough to have remembered it.
Yeah.
For me, this is the best Devils defense structure-wise of my life.
Easily. I mean, you go back to that global series, it's a 4-1 win and a 3-1 win. Those are both just ideal games.
Yeah.
Only issue is after that, you come home after a 4-day break, a bit of international travel, maybe some jet lag, and they wound up dropping their first home game of the season to the Toronto Maple Leafs, Sheldon Keefe's former team. They lose it 4-2, And I remember after that game, kind of like you came back down from the high of the global series a little bit, where like you were so pumped up, especially because it was the only NHL game going on, or the only NHL games were the global series at the time. So the Devils and Sabres got out to a 2-game start before anybody else dropped the puck.
And still now a lot of teams have games in hand on the Devils at this point.
Yeah, they still do. I'm not really sure when they're supposed to pick those games up, but like, regardless, they bounced back from that. They picked up a couple of wins. One against the Caps, which is probably going to turn out a lot
in
bigger,
hindsight.
Down the stretch. Lost to the Canes. But for me, I pick up the season kind of like in terms of like storylines with this team with that Western Canada road trip. The end of October and the start of November. They go out to Western Canada, and they got shut out by the Calgary Flames 3-0, which was like another. Is that weird thing with the shutouts? They kept losing and not scoring any goals in games where they lost. It was really weird. I think they had like 5 shutouts in the first half of the season, like before Christmas, or maybe like there was one after the New Year. But they get a 6-0 win against Vancouver, and that was before Vancouver was like remotely close to thinking about selling.
Tanking, yeah.
And then a 3-0 win against Edmonton. So that like a really, really successful road trip on the West Coast. It was a bit of an early indicator to what this team can do against better teams and when they're traveling and when it's like the most possible strain that you can have on the team. And they were still getting it done and producing. And then after that, for me, it's the Florida run is the next thing I look at. That being the stretch of 3 games all away against the Panthers and the Lightning, where they beat the Panthers twice. This is in November now, by the way.
Yep.
November 12th and 14th, they beat the Panthers twice on the road, 4-1 and 6-2. Again, the defensive performance out of this world. Who's holding the Cats to 1 goal or 2 goals, and also on the back at putting up 4 and 6, 10 between the 2 games.
Right.
And then they go to Tampa at the end of the week and another shutout
They're
loss.
on the receiving end of the shutout. I'm glad you bring up all this, like the back and forth, right? Because the quality is there. They obviously have enough to beat teams into the ground and to shut them out. The defensive structure has been there. I think, pairing Luke Hughes next to a Brett Pesce. We still talk about Luke Hughes has got some growing pains in his game. He still needs to develop some of those issues out, some of those bad changes, some of those bad puck plays. There's still an element of that, but playing next to, a guy as sharp defensively as Brett Pesce has helped elevate his game to a new level. He's been fantastic. Putting Kovacevic next to Jonas Siegenthaler has been among the best shutdown pairings across the National Hockey League. And then when you put Dougie Hamilton next to Brendan Dillon, neither of those guys are necessarily, top elite defensive guys in their own zone, but the size that they provide and the power, and still in many ways, Dougie Hamilton is out there like a fourth forward. He's got 30-plus assists on the year to this point. He's been great, even after a slow start.
He's been shooting it more, too, which I'm really happy about. He wasn't shooting a lot at the start of the season, but you start to see him sit at the top of the circle a little bit more, waiting for the one-timer, and he's gotten a couple to go. The more he scores, the more confidence he builds, the more he winds up shooting. So really good things to see from Dougie Hamilton in that regard. And I think it comes from playing with Brendan Dillon.
Right.
Like, you get the size on both ends of the ice on defense. There's nowhere they can really go. It kind of allows Dougie Hamilton to leak forward a little bit more.
And in that now alteration of his game, at the start of the year, that pairing was getting a lot of criticism for their antics in their own zone, but now they've kind of gotten out of that habit, and to that end, they've kind of been one of the better pairings in terms of the advanced statistics. I don't have it in front of me because the internet's loading, and unfortunately, but in terms of defensive pairings, I mean, they've been pretty darn good, right up there, 39th in terms of percentage expected goals for. That's Siegenthaler and Kovacevic, which is currently the highest among defensive pairs only.
They've been
that
so
New Jersey
good.
has. They've been so
We were talking
good.
about it before the show. Like the Jonas Siegenthaler loss to this injury now, where he's day-to-day, it hasn't been disclosed yet. I think they're still going to evaluate his injury.
Right.
That was from the shootout loss against Pittsburgh. or a shootout win, sorry,
Yes,
against Pittsburgh.
That is a narrow win.
Yeah. Really great win. We'll probably get into that later. But I think the Siegenthaler loss is honestly, like, it's hurting them more than losing Nico Hischier, which is crazy to say because Hischier's the captain.
Right.
But Siegenthaler, like that pairing of Siegenthaler and Kovacevic has been so good. Not having Siegenthaler there, like, you lose that pairing, and it shakes up all the other pairings, which, like, at base level, the 3D pairings that the Devils had before the Siegenthaler injury were locked down. But then Siegenthaler goes, and Keefe, trying to sort of like remake the, like, he had to shake up the D pairings because of the Siegenthaler loss, and it hasn't really hurt the Devils. I don't think it's necessarily helped them that they kind of have to like rebuild chemistry now on defense. But I mean the way that Sheldon Keefe coaches this defense and the way that they have them structured, like you mentioned, it's pretty plug and place,
right,
in terms of like moving guys around. Like, as long as they kind of understand each other a little bit, it should be fine, and it has been.
I think the dynamic is still the same, but, you know, at the beginning of the season and for most of the season, it was Hamilton and Dillon, it was Pesce and Hughes, and it was Kovacevic and Siegenthaler. Right now, Hamilton, Dillon still together, as you would expect, but Kovacevic is playing with Pesce, so that's still the de facto shutdown pairing, but you've got two right-handed sticks on there. It's obviously not going to have as much efficacy as Siegenthaler and Kovacevic. And then Luke Hughes most recently was playing with Simon Nemitz, who was got that call-up. He had comments throughout the year from Utica that it made it seem like he was a little bit upset that he wasn't playing at the NHL level. I think he proved last year that he belongs at the NHL level, but this Devils blue line, I mean, that's a tough blue line to play your way into.
They loaded up in the offseason,
right,
and he was kind of like basically the odd man out going into this season where, yes, we know you can play at an NHL level. Yes, you gave us good NHL time last season.
Right.
But like they had six D-men that needed to be up, and like they just didn't have room for him. So on the one hand, on like the GM end, I would say, like, I love having Simon Nemitz like back down at Utica because he gets to build his game more. But like, he was already at a stage where he needs to be building his game at a bottom D line in the NHL, not in a top D line at AHL.
And I think we learned that in the two games that he was called up to play, especially in that game against Vegas, where he and Luke Hughes did not look that great. I think.
Sheldon Keefe said post-game, though, he said nobody looked great.
Nobody
looked
like, great. It would be tough to evaluate him purely based on that game.
They asked, the reporters in the post-game, they asked Sheldon Keefe to elaborate on what he saw from Simon Nemitz, and he literally said, like, right after that, just, I don't think it would be fair to individually analyze anybody
that's
because
a good
they were bad across the board. Yeah, that's a good coach. That's defending your guy.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, Nemitz is not alone in that category because Seamus Casey started this year and was perhaps the Devils' best defenseman at the start of the season. 3 goals in, I think, 5 or 6 games to start the year from him. And obviously he was going to spend most of the year in Utica anyway. He was a AHL All-Star and was injured for the All-Star game. Who replaced him? Nemitz did. And I think Santeri Hataka is a guy who is on injured reserve on his way back, could play his way into a discussion at being at the NHL level as well.
He looked fine last year, too.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the Devils got a lot of decent looks from their young defensemen last year, and that was why I was kind of shocked when they made as many defensive moves last offseason as they did, because I thought they would just go goaltender and then kind of lean on the young guys.
Yeah.
But then they loaded up with the free agents, and it's kind of, it's giving the young guys the short straw a little bit. But I guess that's what comes with being
hockey.
young. Yeah.
That's hockey, and I think, the results speak for themselves in terms of how good the defense has been. I think, you got to give GM Tom Fitzgerald credit for the moves he made in the offseason and just, what that has produced for this team. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe also the trade that was used to pick Mikhail Yegorov, who is the Boston University goalie who's absolutely killing it right now, was in the trade to get rid of Akira Schmid. So I believe
that pick?
I believe that pick came through that. I could be totally wrong about that. Maybe we have to cut that out. But regardless, I think the moves were exactly what they needed. And I think about the forward core as well. A guy like Paul Cotter coming in and Stefan Nason have completely revitalized what should have been the middle six, but then Nason is playing his way into the top line, and that line has been fantastic. If I look compared to across the league of forward lines that have played at least 200 minutes together, I think that line is right up there with the best of them. Yeah, in 7th place in the league, Hischier, Timo Meier, and Stefan Nason. 7th with 61.5 expected goals percentage.
Yeah, that's Swiss line.
Like, that's obviously you keep Timo and Nico together when you can. Timo's drawn a bit of criticism this year for not scoring as many goals, but he's playing on the second power play. He's playing as second fiddle to guys like Nico, Jesper, and Jack Hughes, who are
raises a question
10th and 11th in
like,
scoring.
Yeah, okay, so that is really tough. It's a log jam again.
It is a difficult discussion to have because obviously Timo Meier has the ability to be a 40-goal scorer. He's done it before, but there's only one puck out there. How many times is he going to be the one who's taking the shot?
And he's playing on the second line normally,
right?
Like just straight. It's been Andre Palat, Jack Hughes, and Jesper Bratt on the top line since Nico's been down.
And they've been good too.
Yeah, they've been really good. How about Andre Palat? He was getting so much
worked
criticism.
his game back.
More criticism than Timo Meier. I would say at the start of this season, there were people calling for Andre Palat's head, and I stuck with them. I was like, this is a veteran guy. This is not somebody who's gonna just kind of fall apart like some rookie and get in his own head. This is a veteran NHL player, and he proved exactly that. He put his head down, he didn't react to the criticism, and wound up becoming an essential part of this PB&J line now.
Right.
Where he's literally just doing all the dirty work at the bottom of the boards, in the corners, digging the puck out for Jack and Jesper to go put on a show.
And it's not like he's been the third wheel there either, right? He's gotten important assists, important goals lately. I think with the absence of Hischier, he stepped up in a way on the power play that I didn't think he had in him still at this point, where he's grinded out goals in important games now from Andre Palat's perspective. Peering back at the schedule, I was trying to think, before that Western Canada road trip that really showed the dichotomy of, okay, they can shut out teams, but they can get shut out, and then they can shut out another good team again. I think about the game before they went on that trip. I had my whole family there, a 1-0 loss to Mackenzie Blackwood and the San Jose Sharks.
Oh, boy.
And I remember thinking, this better not become a recipe for this season.
I think I covered that game for FUV.
Yeah, I was there. I was there as a fan with my family, and we were like, of course we picked the one game where they get shut out by the worst team in the league. They got 40-something shots, like a 43-save shutout from Mackenzie Blackwood. We always knew he had it in them.
It's always the former Devils players.
Right, and now the Colorado Avalanche goaltending tandem is Blackwood and Wedgwood. I'm like, what is this, 2018? So, I don't know. I thought that would be that was a good lens for me for what has been the Devils' issues lately, right? That when they lose games, they're not getting bodied out there. I think back to the team that they had 2 years ago. They didn't get shut out once. They always found a way for their offense to make a presence known. They didn't get shut out a single time that season. Was that the only time in franchise history that has happened? I'm trying to remember the statistics that came out. It's incredibly rare to have gone a full season.
It was a long,
in every game.
Yeah, it was a long streak, and I think it spilled over into the next year too.
Into the next year, and from the previous year, from what I recall.
Yeah.
So it was close to, if not more than 100 games, which is phenomenal. That's incredibly impressive. But what speaks out to me now is that while this team feels more like the 2022-23 Devils than the 23-24, I still feel like they're missing an element of that team, where there are games where they don't look like themselves. They don't score. They get beaten 2-1. I feel like the team 2 years ago was winning games that they didn't deserve. This team is losing games that they should be winning.
Should be winning.
And I think there was one of the more recent games I had been to, a 2-1 loss to the Senators on January the 19th. To me, that one stuck out because the Devils had everything that they needed to do to win that game. It was a lucky late deflection goal from Ottawa that was the difference. And the Devils just couldn't get going. First periods have been a kryptonite for New Jersey this year. Going down early, I mean, it was a meme last year for how many times Ryan Novozinski tweeted, 1-0 them. Like we're getting prepared for that tweet every day. That hasn't gone away completely. The Devils have had to be a comeback team, which was in their ethos a couple years ago, but they're too good for that to continue. And I think that kind of molded what became the what did you call it? The post-Christmas collapse?
Yeah, the post-Christmas break decline.
The Christmas break decline. And, in many ways, they still haven't dug themselves all the way out of it. That happened when their team was still largely healthy. Hischier was there. Siegenthaler was there. Markstrom was there. There were games, I'm looking at it in front of me.
The wheels came off the bus a little bit before the injuries showed up, for sure. And then, the injuries kind of compiled things. Although it also kind of made the Devils, it forced Sheldon Keefe to shake things up. Where it was sort of a time in the season when we were I feel like we were about to start asking, when are we going to shake things up and try to like change the trajectory, because we're currently on a downward trajectory. But then the injuries forced the hand of Sheldon Keefe, made him shake up the defense, made him change the offensive pairings a little bit. I mean, we've seen a couple guys move up like Nason. We've seen a couple guys get bounced down, like Dawson Mercer kind of slowed down a little bit.
He's an interesting one, man. We talk about Timo Meyer is intriguing because there's a logjam at the forward position. I think Mercer kind of exists in this weird middle place where it's like he started the season on the first line and has since been dropped to the third line. And he's not missed a game in his career. So he's as consistent as they come. But there have been moments where I'm like, this guy has been an amazing 200-foot forward. I think in Hischier's absence, he has stepped up really not only in the face-off dot, but in ways defensively where we didn't have other forwards contributing. I think guys like him and Palat have accepted that responsibility. But I think there was a 3 or 4 month stretch to the season prior to the Hischier injury where Dawson Mercer really hadn't pinpointed his spot in the team yet.
No, it was kind of a ghost, and it wasn't even really his fault. Like
right,
you're saying,
he
didn't know like where he kind of fit into the structure, and as a result, he wasn't really getting the scoring opportunities that he's normally used to. I'm just looking at the Devils' kind of season stats so far this season. Dawson Mercer has 25 points. That's like for the forward group, that's lower end. I mean, he has a couple more points than Andre Palat. He's got 3 more points than Luke Hughes. That's a defenseman.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
you wanted to get a little bit more out of a guy like Mercer.
Yeah, for sure. You want to at least see steps forward because he's still young. So you want to see him like with that positive trajectory as time goes on. Because if it starts to, if he starts to plateau a little bit. They're gonna have to start looking elsewhere. Like we've been saying, it's a logjam. The Devils have too many good players to have a guy like Mercer trying to figure it out.
Right.
When there's like people behind him still that could wind up getting bumped up.
And I'm thinking about it 2 years ago, and I keep making these parallels because I mean, as far as success goes in recent Devils history, that year stands alone. Tomas Tatar scored 48 points. Like, we were talking about like the secondary contributors. Mercer was a 20-goal scorer and a 40, 50-point guy. Is there almost an over-reliance on guys like Jack Hughes, guys like Jesper Bratt? Because after that January 19th game against the Senators, the biggest quote that stuck out to me, and I'll play it for you folks in a minute, was Sheldon Keefe speaking about how the best players on this team needed to show up in those types of games. Because if those guys aren't showing up, we've not been getting the production from guys like Mercer, from guys like Paul Cotter, who kind of dried up after a great start to the season. Tatar has been more of a role player than a secondary scorer this year. So here's what Sheldon Keefe had to say.
Our best players have to be better. Like it's that simple. End of statement. I thought we were great. I mean, again, we don't give up much. Second period we gave up some off of some puck battles or pucks that we turned over inside our zone that they got some chances on, but our structure has been fine, which is why we're hanging around in these games, not getting blown out. I mean, defensively we're fine. We got to execute better. I mean, we ran alone 2-3 times in the first period, and some of our best people, like we need those got to go in the net. With where we're at, like we got to convert, and when you don't, it's going to be a tough game. And it's a tough game here again today. And, you sort of leave the game open for them. They get a spin around shot and, in the slot, they get a point shot. I think it's, 2 of their least productive offensive players that they have on their team that end up scoring. And that's just kind of the way the game goes. But you leave it like that when you don't convert on offense.
So there was Sheldon Keefe post-game from that loss to the Ottawa Senators earlier in January, about a month ago now. For me, that speaks out a lot because not only does he say our best players need to be better, but he's like, we're losing games 2-1, 1-0, 3-2. We're not getting outplayed, really. Our defensive structure is fantastic. We just need guys like Hughes and Bratt to show up in every game. And those guys are 10th and 11th in scoring. Jack Hughes has got 65 points and 24 goals. Bratt's got 64 points, 47 assists. Both of those guys are 40-plus assists. It's hard to say that we need more from those guys, in my opinion. But I understand where Kiefer's coming from in that game. are the Devils overly reliant on those two specifically and that line for scoring? Or is it fair to say that, when the going gets tough, those guys need to lead the charge? I think there's yes to both of those questions, in my opinion. How do you see it?
I think there might be some kind of a feeling in the Devils locker room of that top line, kind of not like they rely on them, but sort of that top line has taken it upon themselves to carry this team forward. I mean, like the numbers between Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt are blistering, and they're only going to keep skyrocketing as the season goes on. The two of them together are ridiculous. At this point, I can't believe they got split up for like a couple of weeks there. But I don't think the Devils I don't think it's a bad thing to rely on a top pair like that too heavily. Look at McDavid and Draisaitl.
Yeah.
That's a winning combination in Edmonton, and they've got plenty of role players around them, but nobody is meant to stand out like McDavid and Draisaitl are. Hughes and Bratt are kind of like the McDavid and Draisaitl of the Devils. Mm-hmm. And like Nico Hischier, obviously he doesn't go down. His scoring total's probably a little higher.
He's tied with the leading goals with Jack right now.
Yeah, so obviously there's that, and then Timo Meyer's production may have also not like he's plateaued a little bit, but it's because he's not playing with Hischier at the moment, and he's just playing on a line without his Swiss buddy. So I don't know if it's necessarily a reliance, but they definitely are the crux of the offense. And yeah, I think there might be something to be said about like sustainability. Think about playoffs. Can the Devils legitimately rely on Jack Hughes and Jesper Bratt to be on it night in and night out for a 7-game playoff series? Like, what if they run out of gas after like 2 or 3 games because they're doing all the scoring and nobody else wants to step up? That's what Stefan Nason had a little bit to say after the Vegas Golden Knights game, the second to last game before this break. Stefan Nason mentioned care. He mentioned that the Devils, like he had a feeling that the Devils didn't really care enough. We actually have that sound. We'll roll that right now. That's Stefan Nason.
The more we care about each other and the more we care about, winning games and taking care of the puck and, again, the fight another day, sometimes that's a win. The simple message for me is just, we just need to show a little more care, don't care whatever I do, care more about the next person. It's a trickle-down effect. It starts with, our big boys and goes all the way down the line. It doesn't matter who you are.
And again, that was Stefan Nason after the loss at home to the Vegas Golden Knights right before the Four Nations break. And, Sheldon Keefe was asked about that interview too. He said he didn't like using the word care because he thinks everyone on this team does care. But for Sheldon Keefe, it was more about a maturity. Almost like the Devils need to kind of grow and learn how to play high-level playoff hockey. I have another clip of Stefan Nason talking about playoff hockey and what it's like playing against those teams like the Hurricanes or like the Golden Knights who we played, so we can roll that one too.
Yeah, it's playoff hockey. It's a four-checking game. You see the best teams in the world that, sit there and play, and, the Vegas, the Carolinas, it's out of your zone, it's in their zone, it's going to town, it's working. It's going hard. There's times to use your skill, and there's times to, fight another day, and I don't think we understand what the difference is yet.
And once again, that's Stefan Nason on playoff hockey. So a lot of good knowledge from Stefan Nason after that Vegas Golden Knights loss, Birle.
I think, honestly, I'm glad that the conversation has shifted to Steph because obviously in his second stint with the Devils, scored one of the biggest goals of the 2018 season. Their 1 year they made the playoffs in that god-awful stretch post-2012 where he scored that one-timer off the feed from Taylor Hall, their only playoff win between 2012 and 2023. So that was a special memory for me. To have him come back, it felt a little bit of my childhood coming out again, and you always love moments like that, but he's also having a career year.
Yeah, I was going to say, having him come back and play the way that he has so far is incredible.
And we heard quotes from him not only after the Vegas game, but throughout the year, where he was saying, I was never really given this chance on Carolina, because we talk about the Devils having a logjam at the forward position. That Carolina team in the past 4 or 5 years, where Nason was, a big factor in many ways, he wasn't as big of a factor as he could have been, playing behind guys like Teravainen, like Aho, Natchez, who's now been traded, obviously. But now that he's gotten to be the power forward on very skillful lines that he otherwise wasn't, he's been incredibly effective. The most effective power play scorer in the National Hockey League relative for goals per minutes on the power play. A great net front presence. I believe his
yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned that.
Yeah.
It's like shades of the
Unbelievable.
2000s from Stefan Nason, just standing right there outside the crease, and just like every
feels
time
like,
there's a
feels
loose
like a
puck.
Joe Pavelski type guy.
Yeah, dude, he's just like firing it into the back of the net from point blank range. It's like, it's stuff that we weren't seeing from the Devils last year, when we were talking about just like being in such a struggle and lacking the physicality. And like, not only did they bring the physicality with the free agent signings on the defense, but like you said, you bring in Cotter. He's a fighter.
Speedster too.
Stefan Nason has been doing it in front of the net. He's been doing it behind the net. He creates problems in the offensive zone for the other team. And like, every time there has been like a scuffle or a scrum with like maybe some punches thrown, guess who's at the center of it every single time?
It's pretty likely that Stefan Nason is going to be in there.
90% of the time, it's either started by or perpetuated
by
Stefan Nason.
I love it. And I like that was an element that the Devils were really missing, was that physicality, that grit. Clearly, they addressed it on the blue line, bringing in guys like Brendan Dillon. Stefan Nason addresses that. I mentioned Tomas Tatar 2 years ago. He wasn't a Devil last year. They brought him back. Obviously, they refined his game a little bit, less of a contributor, more of a role player. He's got more fourth-line minutes than anything this year.
He's still positive on the plus
Positive
minus,
on
though.
the plus-minus in an area that actually Nason is a minus. I mean, having a lot of power play goals doesn't really help you bring the plus up, but I think it's worth mentioning for Nason because, going into the season, his career is, I think his highest total in goals was 15. He's already beaten that and then some at this point. And they still got 30-something games or 20-something games left to play in the season, like 27 games? 25 games?
Yeah,
25
like
games. I think it's 25 games. 25 games to go in the year. Nason has been a revelation in a way that, guys like, we hope more out of Dawson Mercer. Nason stepped up in a way that you didn't expect. Timo Meier, I think maybe one thing I would criticize Sheldon Keefe for is in the absence of Hischier, I think that would be the time. Get Meier involved with Power Play 1. They've gone for Palat instead, who, before on the show, I said I'm very happy to see that he's taken that progression and has taken that responsibility and done well with it. But I think Meier, that was a chance to really harness his power and his shooting ability. But 3 power play goals this season, playing with the second unit. That's more than any other person on that second unit. He's really taken the initiative with that second crop of players. I'm hoping we can see more in the final 25 games.
Yeah, I almost wish he did more of that on his 5-on-5 line, where like he kind of takes control of that second power play line. You see him doing a lot of what Jack does, where like skating with the puck, but the way Jack does it, it's a lot more finesse and like just like trying to move the puck around and dangle a little bit.
Too much.
Yeah, a little. Obviously. I mean, I point to the Pittsburgh shootout.
Yeah,
not even just overtime. I mean, yeah, you could say the overtime, but like, come on, you're the second shooter in a shootout, and you're losing the puck right in front of the net. Like, really? But where was I going with that?
Talking Timo Meier at 5-on-5.
Right, Timo Meier. Like I wish he would take more control of his 5-on-5 because when he skates with the puck on his own, like he skates strong. That power moves to the net with the puck on the outside. He's always getting to the net front when he does
effective.
that. It's almost impossible to stop because he's so big. And like I just wish I saw more of that because when I'm at the games and when I see him do that, it always puts a smile on my face.
Right.
But then that's the only time I see him do it, and he like touches the puck maybe 6-7 times the rest of the night, and he's always looking for a pass. I wish he would kind of take it upon himself to become more of a scorer, even though I know you're playing on you're not playing on the top line. I know we're not the Devils aren't asking you to score more, but if you took the agency on yourself to score more, it would you take the pressure off of Jack and Jesper. You maybe even make them better. Because if teams start worrying about you a little bit more, they have to worry about, I don't know, maybe they'll worry about Jack and Jesper a little bit less.
Yeah.
You just don't know unless you get that production, and it's kind of just been sort of a pedestrian season for him in the 5-on-5.
It's almost like, if when Juan Soto's batting, Aaron Judge is on deck, you got to pitch to both of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, or one of the two at least,
Yeah.
I think that we are one or two steps away from like really seeing the progression for a guy like Timo. I think Dawson Mercer's got a little bit more work to do to get back into that fold. Palat, for his game to have risen the way it has, I think surprised a lot of people pleasantly. And I think now that really that's going to center our focus now for this final discussion on the bottom six. And while they did address some areas of concern, bringing in guys like Cotter, I still think that there's room for improvement here. Curtis Lazar, coming back from the injury, hasn't quite been the player that they wanted him to be. Nate Bastian, still, for me, kind of exists in that area where...
Although I've been a little bit impressed with Nate Bastian this year.
Yeah.
Just like a little bit after he got the bubble.
Mm-hmm.
Bubble Bass.
Bubble Bass. I love it.
But Nathan Bastian, I think he's been getting a little bit better. The progressions are there.
I agree.
Similarly to how Luke Hughes has been progressing, but with slightly less slightly less amount of job security.
Mm-hmm.
I just think Nate Bastian. It's a bottom six role. You're not going to get a lot of scoring. You're not going to get a lot of looks, but there's been times when in those say in those shutout games or in games where the Devils have been getting shut out, and then they start putting something together in the second period, it's been the fourth line.
Mm-hmm.
That bottom line of forwards has been it's been giving the Devils a little bit of juice. They don't always score, but it's kind of like sometimes the Devils need to prove to themselves that they can play offense at a high level.
Yeah.
And that they can score at will when they want to. And sometimes it's the fourth line that shows them that they can move the puck around and get looks on net. It can't happen as often as it's happened this season.
Someone who has sneakily played 39 games this season is Justin Dowling, who is, in the absence of Heischer, had to step up into the third line and play as a third line center, but most of his years obviously been spent on the fourth line. I think he kind of speaks to that method that you were just talking about. Like, he's been a guy who's been driving that line forward, always high energy, clearly plays like he's playing for his spot at the NHL level because he is. And he's got 8 points to his name. Nothing crazy, but he is clearly an energizing factor. It's just, my question is, can they get one of those types of players who can also contribute with more points? Obviously, Justin Dowling does not have a massive future in the NHL already. I'm not sure how old he is exactly, but he's not a youngster in this league. For him to have provided the energy is exactly what you want in a taxi type of guy. But if they can get that day in, day out while also getting points generated from a third line, I think I would be very, very happy with that. I've been very impressed with his ability to drive the games forward, but obviously just not the type of player that they need at this moment.
Now that we've been talking about the bottom six and obviously the trade deadline is on its way.
We were going here.
We had to get here eventually. Like we've been saying this whole time, the Devils are absolutely jammed up at the top end of their, actually across the board on defense and in the top six on offense, completely jammed. It kind of puts them in a weird spot at the trade deadline because you can't go get, we were talking before we started recording about names for guys who might be available. Brock Besser came up.
That's a big one.
I don't know if he fits because it might be another logjam.
It'd be tough.
But then you bring up guys like Kyle Palmieri or Noah Dobson.
And
if
Lord
the
knows
Islanders,
I love a reunion.
If the Islanders feel and obviously the Tatar reunion, Stefan Nason reunion, it kind of almost makes sense
to bring in a guy
to try
like
and
Palmieri.
get after Palmieri,
Yeah.
bring him back and bring that Devils pedigree back, and plus because Palmieri isn't necessarily a top six guy.
He's not a top six guy, but
he
he's
can
that
slide
side
pretty easily.
He's that third liner type of guy who is going to snipe in some goals, some chances here and there. For me, I'm looking at the lines right now. For Eric Haula to have crept back into the top six feels like something that they need to mitigate against. Obviously, it's because Heischer is injured, and I love Eric Haula, but
They're light at the center position.
They're very light down the middle. Eric Holla has felt more like a role player than anything this year. The points production haven't been there.
He is at -8, I think. That's that's highest for forwards easily.
He's had to deal with injury. I don't feel like he's good enough to be the top 6 centerman, a top 6 forward, and I really don't think he's what they need in a third-line center either. He feels to me like the prototypical fourth-line center for this team right now, unless he hits another element of his game. That's why guys like Ryan O'Reilly speak out to me potentially as potentials. Obviously, you'd have to give up something to get a guy like O'Reilly. Brock Nelson, but we don't know if the Islanders are going to be sellers yet because they've been on a bit of a heater lately. I think it makes for interesting a dichotomy because, yes, Brock Besser would add scoring to the top 6, and they certainly could use more scoring in the top 6. But what does that mean for a guy like Timo Meier? Is he going to play on the third line? Is Andre Palat going to go back to playing on the third line? Because he certainly didn't fit in there. And if I'm looking at the prospects New Jersey had, we mentioned Yegorov, but I'm thinking about the defensemen. Seamus Casey, Simo Nemec, Santeri Hitaka. None of those guys are playing NHL minutes right now. I'm not happy if we trade any one of those three. I think Casey and Nemec obviously have a future at this level. I think Hitaka's shown he's been good enough. And a name that often gets thrown out in trade rumors on the Twitter sphere is Dawson Mercer. And that's a guy who I still think has an element of his game this season he hasn't reached. So,
but there's we've seen the flash. Honestly, last year he wasn't even that.
No,
he wasn't that bad.
He wasn't.
He was decent last year, and it's not been a step back, but it's not been a step forward.
That's the thing is he hasn't hit that stride that a lot of people. I mean, this is season 4 for him.
I believe so.
And a lot of people were hopeful that he'd be at another level at this point. And I think it's okay that he isn't. And I think we've seen it in moments this year where he's been that guy. And I think that the Hischier absence challenged guys like him and Palat to really step up. It's challenged guys like Meier as well. And guys like Cotter even. Cotter has kind of hit a resurgence in his game. The one of those 4 that I just mentioned, though, Timo Meier, for me, needs to hit that next level because, I mean, he's making the big bucks. He's a 40-goal scorer in his past. But I still think
before this season, it was probably going into this season, I was really thinking of Timo Meier as a leading scorer. I wasn't necessarily looking for. Well, I guess I was looking for Jack to put up a bunch of points, but I wasn't looking for Jesper to go off as much as he has. I wasn't looking for Nico to put the team on his back for the first 2 months of the season, and it's kind of left Timo Meier in this weird spot where we had expectations for him early, they weren't fulfilled, but the rest of the team was playing really great. So it was kind of okay, that's fine, you can figure it out later. But now, with Hischier injured, Siegenthaler injured, Markstrom injured, and in a decline since the Christmas break, this would be the time, if ever, for Timo Meier to sort of figure it out and start to score on a Jack Hughes, Jesper Bratt level.
Yeah, and if I'm looking at the top 5 players in points, it's the 5 you would expect. Hughes, Bratt, Hischier, Meier, Hamilton. That is what you should be getting. The thing is, though, Hughes and Bratt are at 65 and 64. Then, although he's missed 6 games now, Hischier's at 43, almost a point per game. And then there's another 5-point drop, but Meier hasn't missed time, 38 points in 56 games. You don't need to have 5 guys who
Meier's
are a point per game,
but he needs to be.
He is good enough
Meier
to be
is a
at
point
that
per
level,
game guy,
right? He should be a point per game guy, and Dougie is only a couple seasons removed from scoring 70+ points. He's on after his slow start that hurt him. He's on 36 points with 28 assists. Excuse me, I said it was plus 30 before. It's 28. My apologies. And 8 goals. Those numbers have started to climb up as the element of his game, as that offensive element has started to creep back into his style.
What do you think of Ryan Donato?
Ryan Donato, that's a name that gets floated out a lot. I think he could be a guy he'd be good on a center, be good both ways on the ice. I think the name Ricard Raquel came out as well because he's, Pittsburgh, we don't know what they're going to do yet.
Yeah, I also saw Frederich.
Trent Frederic. I would take that Boston, as well. And I think that's a guy that could play on a third line and be a needle mover.
I don't know how willing Boston is to move anybody.
Because Boston's in a similar position. I mean, the East being as tight as it is makes it difficult for the Devils to look around, at least in their own conference, and say, these are guys that we can really make pushes for. We'll wait and see what Lou wants to do with the Islanders, if they're going to continue to rise on this momentum they've got. It's
exactly what they did last year.
Classic Islanders.
It's exactly the same thing. We were talking at the trade deadline, we were talking about, the Islanders might be sellers, and then they went on like a 10-game heater, and now we're talking like then they snuck into the playoffs. Like it's sort of building that same way again, except this time the Metro's way more open.
Yes.
Like we're talking about the Islanders, if things fall right, could maybe wind up in like a 2 spot in the Metro.
Which would be crazy. That would be crazy. But it's still very possible. I think, the Devils kind of have their name etched on the playoff spot for now.
It's just where in the playoffs, where in the rankings are they going to wind up.
8 points clear of the wild card for the moment, but that's not a guarantee, especially because they're 5-5 in their last 10. They're not playing their best hockey. The injuries, you hope some of those get sorted out after the break. I think Markstrom should be ready shortly or right after the break. Hischier, we don't know. Siegenthaler, it seems he may have gotten surgery according to Swiss reports.
And the entire Metro also has a game or two in hand still from the Czech series.
So if I'm looking at the standings, the wild card race is super, super tight. The Senators and Red Wings have it right now with 62 and 61 points. The Devils in 68 in third place in the Metro. But the Blue Jackets are on 60 points. They're right there. The Bruins are on 60 points. They're right there. The Rangers are on 58. They're right there. The Islanders are on 57. Those are just the teams that are within 5 points.
2 huge games in March. It's a home and away against the Blue Jackets. That's going to be really important in terms of playoff seeding down the stretch. The Devils also have to go on the road and play the Flyers again in March. I mean, the back end of their schedule is really ridiculous. Like, if we want to,
that's a good segue to what should be perhaps our final point in this episode. Is they come right out of the break. They got to host Dallas, and then Nashville.
No, can we talk about that road trip?
And then they got that road trip, man.
Dallas at home, and then it's a 5-game road trip that goes from the end of February into March. They go at Nashville, at Colorado, at Utah, at Vegas, at Dallas again.
That to me, the travel is not as strenuous as going to Western Canada.
But that is teams.
That is an incredibly difficult road trip. That's the test of the season. Is how.
And Utah's Gunter back now. So.
Yeah. Oh my God. We said how important it was for the Devils to go into the break with some momentum. That 4-0. I'm on soccer mode. 4-0 win over the Canadians was huge. Huge to get some momentum back in their sails. And for guys like Jack to get on the scoreboard ahead of the Four Nations, it felt important for them individually, which is what you want for your best guys. But they've got to come out of that break to continue the momentum. Not only will the injuries coming back help, but I think the break needs to be a reset for this team because they're not playing their best hockey. But now they have a little momentum. If they can start with a win against Dallas, oh my God, I would feel a lot better about the rest of this season. It's a tough schedule.
Yeah.
They've got to play Winnipeg twice. They've got to play Minnesota twice. They've got to play Edmonton. They've got to play Dallas twice. They got to play Colorado on the road, Vegas on the road. Like it doesn't get
Philly
easy.
away for the second
Philly
time.
On the road.
Pittsburgh away for
Columbus
the second time
on the
in March.
road.
Western Canada gets they kind of all come through New Jersey at the same time in March. It's Winnipeg at home, and then they get Edmonton, Calgary, Ottawa, and Vancouver at home, and Winnipeg on the road.
That's that stretch where they get those games.
March is tough, but Markstrom is scheduled to come back as of March 7th if all goes well in terms of rehab and stuff. Obviously, we're dealing with an MCL. So want to be very, very careful because
the risk of re-injury
would
high.
be disastrous, especially this late in the season. But if the Devils can get Markstrom back for the 7th, just got to look at the calendar itself. That's the Winnipeg game at home. So it would be right after the road. It would be right after the road trip. Say he doesn't even get back for that game. Maybe he doesn't travel to Philly. He could get back for the home game against Columbus on March 11th. And then the Devils have him for the majority of that Western, the Western Canada teams coming in. That road game against the Blue Jackets and both Minnesota games. Like Jacob Markstrom's return in March, it could be at the opportune moment, and it could take the Devils through this schedule. That's why I'm not necessarily I'm not quivering in my boots over here over this end of the season for the Devils. I would if Markstrom's situation was more ambiguous, but since we kind of know when he's supposed to come back, I don't think he'll be that affected. Sorry, I don't think he'll be that affected by the injury. Maybe like a little bit slower, maybe a little bit more
they've got
careful with that knee. But again, like the defense has been so good in
Yeah.
front of him, he basically just has to stand there and like.
And he's a big guy.
Be a good goalie.
He's a big goalie.
Yeah, he's a sizable dude.
Yeah, and with that said, as tight as the division is, the writing is on the wall for the Devils to make the playoffs, finish third or second, and they're going to have a first-round matchup against what looks like is the Carolina Hurricanes. It would have to take a pretty big shakeup for that not to happen at this point. With 25 games left, there's still room for a lot to change.
And there's room in the last 3 weeks maybe of the season. Like the last thing I'll say about the calendar here is in April, in that little stretch of April where the regular season spills over before the playoffs, the Devils play 6 games in that month in the regular season. 5 of them are at home, and they've had struggles at home before and in this season. But if they can figure out how to get those wins at home, they're not going to be easy. It's the Rangers, the Bruins, the Pens, and then the Islanders all at home. Then you go on the road to Boston, and then you play the Red Wings at home in the last game of the season. That's not an easy stretch, and it's, if it's as tight as it is right now, in the last going into April, they will need every single point from all of those games. But playing most of them at home is huge, and they need to be able to use their home barn to their advantage at that point in the season.
In ways that they haven't yet to this point.
Yes.
And for my money, as tough as that is, I think the Devils have enough to get over that line. Let's say they take 3 or 4 out of those 5 games. I'm confident that that's a realistic expectation and that they go in, make it third or second place in the division.
As long as you beat your Metro opponents. Just make sure you're beating divisional opponents, because they've lost a couple games to the Caps this year. I think have they only lost the one? Or
I think they won that early one, and since then have lost 2.
They lost in Washington in overtime, and I think at home in
They
regulation.
lost at home in regulation, and they almost came back. They were down 6-3 or something and made it 6-5.
Yeah, so 2 losses to Washington is tough, and that's going to hurt them down the stretch. But they've beaten the Rangers plenty, but need to beat the Islanders. Funnily enough, need to beat the Pens. And then
need to beat the Rangers too at the start of that whole thing.
Yeah, do still need to beat the Rangers because
they let one slip against them at MSG after 2 beatdowns.
They still got the loser point.
But
yeah,
I mean, look, I still think the writing is on the wall for a matchup in the first round of the playoffs against Carolina.
I like 2. I honestly think the Devils can, once they get Heischer back, he should be back immediately after the Four Nations break. And once they get Markstrom back,
Siegenthaler is a little more unclear.
Siegenthaler's unclear, but like we've been saying, the structure of the defense is still there, and they can still hold teams to maybe 2 goals in a game. So there's, he hurts, but not as much as I was saying before. I know I'm just contradicting myself now.
But I'm
confident in this Devils team going into the last couple months of the season. I think they really can compete at a high level with all of these teams on the backstretch. At their best, they can win a lot of these games.
Absolutely.
I like 2 in the Metro.
I like 2 as well.
I think that's solid because Carolina...
They're only 2 points back at Carolina.
Yeah.
Come on, they catch that in a week.
They could jump them. Do they play Carolina again?
I believe they have.
I think they have at least one.
They have Carolina... No, they don't play Carolina.
Okay, so done with Carolina.
So that hurts a little bit, but you beat your divisional opponents.
Just got to win when they don't.
And they've got a number of divisional games remaining, including a couple with Philly, like we mentioned, a couple with Columbus, a couple with Pittsburgh, New York, both of the New York teams. So there is room for this team to hit that stride. Quickly before we go, let's make a couple of predictions. And not so much predictions, but more so vibes about how we're feeling. I think, do you think that Tom Fitzgerald goes out and gets one of those types of players we mentioned? Do you think it happens? And if they do, what do you think they send the other way? Is it a Mercer? Is it a Nemeth? Is it a prospect? Or is it one of the second-round draft picks they have next year? And should they do that, does the expectation then change to we're contending for a cup? And if they don't do that, like the team they have right now, what is the expectation? For me, the expectation is make the playoffs, win run round. I don't think it would be
That's
fair.
where we're at now.
That's where we're at. And I don't think it would be fair to expect more of the Devils unless they go and get another player. Do I think they will go and get another player? I personally don't think so.
Yeah,
How do you see it?
I don't think. Yeah, the vibe is not like if we're going off vibes. I don't really feel a move coming.
I don't think a Timo Meier type trade is happening.
No, God, no. They're not
Yeah.
moving. No. They're not moving. They're not moving a lot for a top guy. If anything, like it's maybe a pick and a player for a bottom six guy. Like maybe that Palmieri move if the Islanders wind up trying to sell. But it's gonna take the Islanders honestly going on a skid.
Yeah.
For them to move anybody. That's the weird thing too. They have to kind
gotta
of
wait and see, yeah.
They have to wait for a team that has like solid mid-tier guys
And there's too many of them.
to not be in a playoff position, and they all kind of are in a position to make a run at the playoffs. So I think it's not necessarily Tom Fitzgerald's fault that he's not making a move. It's sort of that he can't make a move that makes a lot of sense,
I think.
or a move that will take the Devils from win one round of the playoffs to go to the Stanley Cup Finals. I think maybe like that Palmieri move, if it gets made, I think you maybe go like a pick. I don't know, maybe just Mercer, maybe Mercer Palmieri, maybe Mercer and a pick for Palmieri, or maybe Hataka and a pick for Palmieri. But
I think that's even a little heavy for Palmieri.
It is
I think
kind
you
of
can
heavy.
Get away with
Just a
not
pick,
dealing
maybe?
one of those guys, maybe a pick or two.
Yeah.
2 picks.
Okay, but like say they get Palmieri somehow, I feel like that move isn't even necessarily
It's not a cup move. It's not a huge.
It's
change.
an ECF move.
Yeah.
But I don't think it's not a Stanley Cup move.
Yeah.
It's sort of going to take like a little bit more than that. I don't even hate right now. I wouldn't hate going to the playoffs with the team as it is healthy with the team as it is now.
That's how I feel too. I'm
Just to see what they
Right.
what this team can do, because I feel like if they get hot in the playoffs, they could go to the Stanley
Right.
Cup even with just the way that they're set up now.
my final piece that I'll say is, the start of the season, it didn't feel like it had to be this year. They've got their best guys locked up long term.
Oh yeah.
And you kind of have to go through that adversity to be a Stanley Cup champion. Like I don't think Florida wins it without losing to Vegas in the finals. I don't think Vegas wins it without having been there in their very first season. I don't think Tampa wins back-to-back without having gone and lost at that level before either. I think there's a number of examples where you look at it like that. I don't think the Devils are ready to be in that cup conversation right now. I think they have to go through it this year, and I think it's with their crop of guys.
And it's that maturity thing that Sheldon Keefe was talking about that I mentioned earlier, where like this team has to first learn how to compete at a playoff level with your Vegases, with your Carolinas, and then after that, they need to figure out how to win at a playoff level. It's not just enough to play at a playoff level. You have to learn how to win at a high elite level, world class level,
Yes.
and it's not easy, and it takes it like you've been saying, it takes losing at that level sometimes, and being able to kind of look at yourself
what
and
they
your
have
team.
to go through.
How did we lose?
Yeah.
Like, what did we do wrong? They missed the playoffs last year. This team has zero like litmus test as to what they can do in the postseason. I think we need to see it once. See what they can put together in the postseason, and if I think it would be kind of a nuclear meltdown if they lost in the first round. But if they win 2 playoff series, I think we can be pretty happy with that.
Oh, I would be very happy with that. I think one playoff series
Going from not making the playoffs to winning 2 series in the playoffs is a ridiculous jump. Even if they won a playoff series 2 years ago, it's still an insane year-to-year progression. So I think you'd just be very happy with 2 playoff series W's into this postseason because this team has been so good during stretches this year.
Well, Tucker, I think that's a good place to end it. And I'm glad we recorded this when we did, not only because is there no NHL hockey going on, but I think these next 3 weeks of this NHL season are going to end up being so consequential. I think
That month of March is going to be
and the lead up to the deadline
one of the most ridiculous
is
Marches.
going to be crazy. I think we're gonna look at the end of March, mid of March, post deadline. We're gonna look back at what we've said here, and it could be totally different to what the outcome, what their approach to the end of the season ends up looking like. And who knows? Maybe the Islanders continue to look super strong, and they end up buying players at the deadline, and it could just be totally different. I think we're going to learn so much about this Devils team on this 5-game road trip that they have. 6 games before the deadline on the 7th, not including that game on the 7th against Winnipeg. So I don't know. I think this is it was a tumultuous season to this point. I think that it's only going to get more and more crazy as we approach the playoffs. So Tucker, thank you so much for sitting down and doing this with me. Tucker Austin, I've been James Birle. This has been a bit of a Devils discussion, Devils in the details, whatever you want to call it. We have to figure out a title for this when we're done.
Yeah.
Look into the Devils season from both of our beat reporters here at WFUV Sports. It's been a privilege so far, and hopefully they continue to make the good things roll. So any final words before we sign off?
USA Hockey, baby.
USA Hockey.
Time to flip the switch and go international.
Yeah.
USA.
Let's see if Jack Hughes can bring home a gold medal for the Americans.
Come on now.
With that, thank you guys so much for joining.